Tompa Mihaly. Born September 28, 1817 in Ramazanbad, died July 30, 1868 in Hanva. Poet. Son of a bootmaker from impoverished line of aristocrats. Parents' death placed him in care of grandparents. Entered Reformatus Collegium in Saraspatak in 1832 with help of Zantimri family. Worked as servant to students. Left school in 1838 to become assistant teacher in Sarbogard. Returned to Collegium in Saraspatak in March 1839 and completed studies in theology and law in 1844. Poems appeared regularly from 1840 in Athenaeum, Elet Kepek, Pesti Divatlap, and Hondaru. Served as tutor in Apurges, where he began friendship with Sandor Patofi, QV, in 1845. In December 1845 went to Pest, where he became acquainted with Joseph Baja, Andras Fay, Mihaly Razmarda, QQV, and Ferenc Toldi. Considered becoming lawyer and remaining in Pest but accepted ministry in Bij in 1846. Member of Kisfaluti Tarsasig in 1847. Moved to Kalemur in 1849 and Hanva in 1851, where he remained until his death. Married Emilia Zsoldos in 1849. Formed close friendship with János Arany, QV, in Nagykoros in 1852. Visited by Arany and family for a month in 1855. Journeyed to Transylvania in 1856. Became member of Academy in 1858. Awarded Academy Prize for Memorial Poem on Ferenc Kazincse, QV, in 1859 and its Grand Prize for his poems in 1868. Was Arany's guest in Pest in summer 1865. Health began serious decline in 1857. Went to Vienna in 1866 for medical attention to hypertrophy of heart. Important representative of popular and national tendencies in Hungarian literature. Transitional figure between romantic sentimental and folk national poetry. His narrative poetry considered inferior, allegories and elegies effective. Lyric poems often take form of reveries. Often praised for use of materials from nature. Major theme, death and transitoriness of life. First, and possibly greatest, success was achieved by collections of popular legends. Some of his poems have been translated into Arabian, Bulgarian, English, French, German, Hebrew, Italian, Romanian, Russian, Slovakian, and Swedish. Turok Gyola. Born July 16, 1888 in Simont, died October 20, 1918 in Budapest. Novelist, short story writer, journalist. Son of a monoreal steward. Attended school in Kolozsvár. Prepared for teaching of history and geography at University of Kolozsvár but never completed studies. Became journalist in Kolozsvár in 1906. Moved to Budapest in 1910 and worked for Magyar Hírlap, later for Esti Ujjság and Magyar Kurőr, and from 1916 for Magyarország. Numerous other periodicals and dailies published his writings, including Népszava, Nyugat, Igyenlószeg, and Pesti Napló. Became an able painter, draftsman, and caricaturist. Died when he was beginning to be acclaimed. Important to development of realistic fiction in Hungary, one to whom later writers turned for study. Some of his short stories retain interest, but are for the most part dated because they represent currents of naturalism and impressionism dominant at the turn of the century. Novels are concerned with criticism of gentry and turn toward realism with social criticism similar to that of Margit Kafka, QV, especially her Znek Esvek. Numerous sketches satirize parasites of society and World War I wrote many criticisms of fine arts. Some of his short stories have been translated into French. Totfolozikis Miklos. Born 1650 in Alsamistofolu, died March 20, 1702 in Kolosvar. Printer, scholar, linguist, publisher. Name also written, Mistofalozikis. Parents were poor. Studied in Alsamistofolu, Najivanya about 1662, and Nagyanit about 1666. Became rector of schools in Fogara 1677 to 1680. Went to Holland in 1680 to master art of printing. Quickly established reputation in Amsterdam and elsewhere in Europe. Also did printing for the Pope. Was invited to establish shop in Florence but prepared to return to Transylvania. In 1689 published bibliophile edition of the Bible in Hungarian with corrections of translation and printing errors. Returned to Transylvania in 1690. Married Maria Seekley. Harassed by religious conservatives who had found his corrections of the Bible offensive, he wrote Apologia Bibliorum, 1697, to justify what he had done. Opposition did not lessen. In 1698 published Megamensage, another reply to opponents. On June 13, 1698, Council of Nagyanit insisted on public apologies to those offended by this reply, and his most important works were burned. He did not live long after this humiliation. His life work represents a large program to develop and popularize Hungarian culture. Tóth Arpad. Born April 14, 1886 in Arad, died November 7, 1928 in Budapest. Poet, translator, critic. Father a sculptor. Affected by father's hopes and difficult financial circumstances of family. Family moved to Debrecen in 1889. Attended gymnasium in Debrecen in 1904 and then entered University of Budapest in 1905 to study Hungarian and German. Beginning in 1907, his poems appeared in a Het, Vezernapi Ujjszeg, and Debrecen dailies, and from 1908 on in Nyugat. Without support from home and with low income from poems, he was forced to return to Debrecen and despite several attempts, never obtained teaching certificate. Father's health and family security ruined by rejection and actual destruction of Freedom statue by the city as poor work of art. Became dramatic critic for Debreceni Független Ujjszeg without pay in fall 1909. Joined staff of Debreceni Nagy Ujjszeg with pay in 1911, and obtained income from criticism and poems being published in Nyugat. In 1913 went to Budapest when Debreceni Nagy Ujjszeg ceased publication. Became tutor to well-to-do family and received some income from writings. Lived under difficult circumstances. Suffered from consumption. Worsening condition forced him to seek health at Svitler Sanatorium in the Tatra Mountains. Thereafter he often spent months in mountains with help from friends. Became assistant editor of Estendo. Married in 1917. Became secretary of Vörösmarty Academy during period of revolutionary government. Could not obtain position after failure of revolution. Circumstances were so desperate he considered suicide. Joined editorial staff of AZ Est in 1921, and circumstances improved, though he remained poor the rest of his life. Made few contributions to Nyugat after 1922. Consumption continued to worsen despite frequent rest periods. Important as a lyric poet in the first quarter of the 20th century and for his development of views and literary principles of Nyugat school. Themes centered on pain and human tragedy in man's vain expectations of love and happiness. Deeply affected by sense of evanescence of life. Poems characterized by attitude of resignation. Made special use of Alexandrine often by adding an extra syllable in middle and slash or at end of line. Noted for skill in structuring images. Critical writings important to illuminating literary developments of his times. One of the best translators of the period, his translations include works of Milton, Wilde, Shelley, Keats, Baudelaire, Flaubert, Gautier, Maupassant, and Chekhov, all accompanied by critical studies. Also translated Aucassin and Nicolet. An edition of his poems is available in Czech, and some of his poems have been translated into Bulgarian, English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Polish, Romanian, Russian, Slovakian, and Swedish. Vajda János. Born May 7, 1827 in Pest, died January 17, 1897 in Pest. Poet, publicist. Father a chief forester. Completed schooling in Zakesfeherber and Pest, where he lived for a time with Peter Vajda, Q.V. His first poems were published in Eletkepek in 1844. Became actor in Hungarian traveling company in 1845 to 1846. Made abortive attempt as tutor, then became apprentice farm manage. Moved to Pest from Alsut in 1847 to become official in Agricultural Association. Became member of Pilbak's group of writers, including Sandor Patofi and Morjokai, QQV. Participated as youth leader during events of March 1848. Served as soldier in Padua in 1850, then worked in cadastral office in Kiskunhalas and in Buda. In 1853 decided to earn living solely by writing. Became staff member of Magyar Sajto in 1855, its managing editor in 1863. Founded Navilag in 1857, edited it till 1863. Also edited Ksader 1861 to 1862. In 1857 fell in love with Jazzy, Georgina, Kurtoquil, Gina of his poems, who did not return affection. Became member of Kisfaluti Tarsasig in 1870. Married Rosa Bardas, Rosamunda of his poems, in 1880, divorced in 1881. Saw Gina in Vienna in 1882, for last time in 1892. Wrote most powerful and individual poetry in the period after revolution. Sought to enlarge horizon of Hungarian poetry to equal that of Europe. Diction and tone represented break with traditions of both Patofi and János Arany and made him predecessor of Endre Ady, QQV. Epic poetry, novels in verse, and stories were not as important as lyrical and satirical poetry. Poems were highly subjective and based on self-love and hatred of world about him. Sense of personal desolation recurring theme, but believed life to be most valuable experience available to man. An edition of his poems is available in German, and some of his poems have been translated into Bulgarian, English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Romanian, Russian, Slovakian, and Swedish. Vajda Peter. Born January 20, 1808 in Vanyola, died February 10, 1846 in Sarvas. Poet, novelist, short story writer, publicist, writer on language and science. Descendant of peasant family. Related to János Vajda, QV, whose development he influenced. Was an outstanding student at Sopron and Győr where he also tutored. From here he toured the Danube, Balaton, Adriatic, Tyrol, and northern Italy. In 1828 he entered University of Pest as medical student, was expelled for alleged demonstration against professor during cholera epidemic of 1831. His first poem appeared in 1831. Edited Hasnos Malatsegok briefly in 1833. Moved to Germany, where he edited Garasostar January 1 to March 22, 1834, then to Holland and England, returning to Budapest in fall of 1834 to become creative writer and journalist. Helped to edit Athenaeum and was acting professor at Lutheran Institute in Pest. Named corresponding member of Academy in 1837. Elected to Kisfaluti Tarsasik in 1840. Chosen secretary of newly founded Society of Natural Science in 1842 but resigned when Royal added to its name. From 1843 he lectured at Gymnasium in Sarvis. Writer in romantic spirit. While still young, he became acquainted with and was influenced by German Romanticism, especially with the ideas of Novalis. His works show passion for nature, pantheism, and strong interest in the Orient. Poems contain patterned, logical reasoning. First developer of prose verse in Hungary. Prose rhapsodizes beauty of nature and its power to bring happiness to man and expresses sympathy for the oppressed, especially social outcasts in India. Translated Shakespeare, Defoe, and Bulwer Lytton. Some of his poems have been translated into French and German. Vas Istvan. Born September 24, 1910 in Budapest. Poet, translator. Completed studies at schools in Budapest. Attended commercial college in Vienna and returned to Budapest in 1929. Writings first appeared in 1928 in Munka and then in Korinc, Pesti Hurlap, Nyugat, Velaz, and Magyark Szalag. Worked as a clerk for various companies 1929 to 1944. Served as chief accounting counselor in Ministry of Interior in 1945. Since 1946 has served as literary advisor to various book publishers, to Europa Konivkiatu since 1956. Visited Italy in 1947, England and Paris in 1959. Awarded Baumgarten Prize in 1948, originally nominated in 1936, Attila Joseph Prize for Translations in 1951, for Het Enik in 1956, for Rhapsodia Egi Azakurt Ben in 1961, and Kossuth Prize for Translations and Original Writings in 1962. His poems show influence of Lehos Kasik and later Arpad Toth, Mihaly Babits, and Deso Kostelanyi, QQV. Subject matter is that of love, private feelings, and opposition to fascism. Sometimes he shows resignation and pessimism. Influenced by Marx and Freud. Among his translations, works of Villon, Shakespeare, Racine, Schiller, Molière, A. France, Apollinaire, Maeterlinck, Defoe, Thackeray, O'Neill, Somerset Maugham, Steinbeck, and Goethe. Some of his poems have been translated into English, French, and Romanian. Veras Peter. Born January 6, 1897 in Balmazaj Veros. Novelist, short story writer, publicist. Descendant of peasant family. Completed fourth form of elementary school. Employed as swineherd when a child, later as a servant, seasonal worker on landed estates, day laborer, sharecropper, leaseholder, and railroad worker in Hordovaji by age 16. Formed early connection with agrarian socialist movement by joining Fold Muvalo Igilit. Educated himself by reading. Served 1 year on Italian front during World War I. Joined Revolutionary Army in November 1918. Became member of Land Distributing Society in early March 1919 in Balmazaj Veros, member of its Workers' Council on March 21, and then member of the Community Directorate. After the failure of revolutionary government, he was captured by Romanian army and imprisoned until end of 1920, imprisoned again for a year in Debrecen, then employed as a railroad and field worker. Helped to revive Agrarian Workers' Trade Union and Social Democratic Party in 1922 and continued as a member of both until 1944. Often arrested for political activities. His writings first appeared in 1930 in Szadunk, Korinc, Gondolate, Amiyudunk, Velaz, and Kulatnib. Imprisoned for a month in 1934 for publication of Mi Lesafold Munkashigal. In Nepsava. Member of populist movement in 1930s and participated in activities of March Front. Served in forced labor camps 3 times during World War II, escaped further detention by hiding in a Budapest basement. President of National Peasants' Party 1945 to 1949. President of National Council for Arranging Landed Properties 1945-1946. Minister of National Defense 1947 to 1948. President of Hungarian Writers' Federation 1954 to 1956. Parliamentary representative since 1945 and a member of National Council of Patriotic People's Front. Awarded Kossuth Prize for Probatetel in 1950 and for Paliamunkasok in 1952. His novels and short stories portray lives of villagers and peasants. Realistic style, sometimes strongly satirical and humorous. Fiction almost plotless, emphasizes characterization. Publicist writings are a record of his involvement in contemporary problems. Sugestendo has been translated into Polish, Probatetel into Bulgarian, Chinese, Czech, Finnish, French, German, Italian, Persian, Polish, Romanian, Russian, and Slovakian, Zalgasag into German, Paliamunkasok into Bulgarian and Polish, Almaskert into Romanian, and some of his short stories into Albanian, Arabian, Korean, Spanish, and Ukrainian. Versegi Ferenc. Born April 3, 1757 in Zalnok, died December 15, 1822 in Buda. Poet, linguist, aesthetician, translator. Name spelled Versky till 1794. Son of a minor official in Zalnok treasurer's office. Distinguished himself as a student at Pest and Eger gymnasiums. In 1771 undertook study for priesthood at Eger Seminary. Spoke German, French, Slovakian, and Latin. Left seminary in 1777 and studied law for half-year at university in Buda. Became acquainted with Pal Enios and also a member of Circle of Gyurgy Besanii, QQV. Resumed study for the priesthood and became member of the Pauline order in 1781 under the name of Eugenius. Obtained doctorate at Buda 1783 to 1784 and lived in order's cloister in Pest. Known as poet by this time. Was a garrison priest 1786 to 1788, then army chaplain. Became ill and lived with widowed mother in Eger. Moved to rented house in Buda in 1789, where he supported mother on small pension and income from translating. Confined to monastery in Nagasambat for 3 months because of anti-church views in his translation of Milat, 3D volume remained in manuscript. Connected with the Jacobin movement, and imprisoned nearly 9 years in Kustine, Graz, and Spielberg for activities. Released on August 28, 1803, and joined the circle of Istvan Horvat, Mihaly Vitkovics, and Benedict Vorag, QV. Became language teacher of Leopoldina Saperi in 1804. Publication of Tista Magyar Sag, 1805, brought conflict with Miklos Rive. Commissioned to edit textbook series on languages in 1814. In last years contributed articles to Ijihazi Erdikizi Zeki Es Tudo Sitasak. Following his mother's death in 1815, he lived with a family in Buda, gradually withdrawing from learned and literary activity. Died after long illness. His poetry shows mixture of classicism and rococo. Lyrical poems were influenced by Anacreon, Horace, and contemporary German poets. Poetry characterized by use of love motif, descriptions of nature, and expression of liberal political viewpoints. His analyses and use of metrics influenced development of Hungarian rhythms. Was the first to use rhymed dactyls in Hungarian literature. Noted for verse tale, Rakoti Matthias. Novels express spirit of the literary revival. As songwriter, influenced by contemporary German composers, especially Mozart. His views of Hungarian language were strongly affected by Herder's concept that language must be built upon laws within a particular language and its living usage. Was the first to translate Horace's Ars Poetica, 1793, and the Marseillaise into Hungarian. Some of his poems have been translated into French and German. Boric Benedict. Born 1754 in Dioscol, died January 23, 1830 in Buda. Poet, translator, historian. Descendant of feudal tenants. Spent boyhood in Najibijam. Received schooling from Piarists in Najikanissa and Pest. Became member of Pauline Order in 1775 and studied philosophy in Pécs and Pest. Taught at Gymnasium in Székesfehérvár, where Pál Enios, QV, was a colleague. Resigned post in 1794 and served Bathyany family as tutor in Pest. Soon resigned to pursue literary activity and study of history. Lived in poor economic circumstances for more than 30 years on small pension and support from friends. Regarded by his contemporaries as the father of Hungarian literature and sought out by many young writers including Daniel Zrinyi, Mihaly Csokonavitez, Ferenc Kalksi, Joseph Baja, Mihaly Városmarty, Károly Kisfaludy, QQV, Ferenc Toldy, Gabor Dobrante, and Pál Zamir. Representative of the classical school in Hungarian literature. His odes contain patriotic and moral themes. Mastered Latin and Greek meters in giving expression to Hungarian spirit and ideas. Often called Hungarian Horace and was the best writer of odes before Zrinyi. His Magyar Századok, an incomplete history, was critical of the Hungarian nation and Catholic Church. Translated the works of Horace extensively. Some of his poems have been translated into English, French, and German. Városmarty Mihaly. Born December L. 1800 in Kapolnasnyek, died November 19, 1855 in Pest. Poet, dramatist, critic. Descendant of middle aristocratic family in difficult financial circumstances. Studied at Cistercian Gymnasium in Székesfehérvár and Piarist Gymnasium in Pest 1811 to 1817. Father's death in 1817 created serious financial problems, but he supported his study of philosophy at University of Pest as tutor in Purcell family. Completed university studies in 1820 and moved to Purcell estate in Borjsina to tutor 3 sons. Became acquainted with writings of Benedict Boric, Gabor Deka, Daniel Zrinyi, and Sándor Kisfaludy, QQV, during first years in Pest. Began to compose poems in mid-teens. Became tutor and law student in Pest in 1824 and passed law examination in same year. Publication of Zéland Fudisa, 1825, brought him immediate fame. Resigned as tutor in August 1826 to devote himself entirely to writing. Lived under hardships in Pest. Contributed regularly to Aurora and was a friend of Károly Kisfaludy, QV. Became editor of Tudományos Gyajtemeni and its literary supplement in 1828 and regular member of Academy in 1830. Awarded Academy Prize in 1833 for Vernaz and shared the Academy's first prize with Sándor Kisfaludy in 1834. Founded Kisfaludy Társaság in 1836 with Joseph Baja, QV, Ferenc Toldy, and several others. Began Athenaeum and Figyelmzó in 1837 in association with Baja and Toldy. Awarded Academy Prize for Marotban in 1839 and its first prize for new poems in 1842. Married Laura Ksagigi on May 9, 1843. In 1845 visited Felsodaza and part of Transylvania with Ferenc Deák. After March 1848 he entered political activities. Was named parliamentary representative of Baksalmis district in summer of 1848. Fled to Debrecen with family in January 1849. Returned to Pest in June 1849 and was named judge by Lehos Kossuth. Fled with government to Zrinyi, but family remained in Pest. Forced to hide in Arad, Bihar, and Satmar with Baja. Reunited with family in Pest in early 1850, having been freed by authorities. Rented land in Barasisk to provide support for family. In 1853 returned to family village and engaged in agriculture. Depressed, wrote only occasionally, and drank heavily. In 1855 worsening health forced move with family to Pest, where he died 2 days after arrival. The most important writer in Hungarian Romanticism. Much of his poetry stems from legends of Hungarian past. Rich in use of imagery and vocabulary. Wrote first in tradition of Hungarian classical and sentimental poetry, which he developed in youthful years to its highest point. Pre-Romantic tendencies matured into Romanticism. His lyric poems and epics were more successful than his dramas. Dramas, like epics, use materials from legend and historical past of Hungary, and show some influence of Shakespeare, Victor Hugo, Friedrich Schiller, and Spanish Baroque dramatists. Imaginative writings touched by concept of death and destruction. In earlier writings he viewed death as something sweet, an escape from reality into dream or solitude. In later works he found significance to life in a rather pantheistic view of Hungary and humanity, but attitude toward both was colored by pessimistic view of possibilities for progress. Zéland Fudisa gave importance to Hungarian epic. Among dramas, Ksangeri Tund, written under influence of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, was most successful. He used the inhabitants in fairyland to symbolize good and bad habits of human nature. Much involved in study of the nature of drama, dramaturgical studies, and dramatic criticism. Editorial and linguistic accomplishments also notable. Translated Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, King Lear, and part of Romeo and Juliet. Editions of his poems are available in English, German, Romanian, and Russian, and some of his poems have been translated into Bulgarian, Czech, Estonian, Finnish, French, Hebrew, Italian, Japanese, Polish, Serbian, Slovakian, Swedish, Turkish, and Wendish. Wałęsa Sándor. Born June 22, 1913 in Szombathely. Poet, translator. Completed elementary school studies in Papa and Ksanje and gymnasium studies in Szombathely, Győr, and Sopron. Recognized as promising poet when 14. Studied law at University of Pécs for 6 months, then geography and history for 1.5 years, and in 1935, philosophy and aesthetics. Obtained doctorate in philosophy. Awarded Baumgarten Prize in 1935 and 1936. Visited Far East in 1937. Worked in libraries in Pécs, Székesfehérvár, and Budapest 1941 to 1950. Was secretary of János Pannonius Társaság and official of Szabad Művelődés in Székesfehérvár for a time. Co-editor of Sorsunk. Visited Italy 1947 to 1948. Traveled in China in 1959. Has devoted time to writing since 1951. One of most important lyric poets in 20th century Hungarian literature. Member of third generation of Nyugat school. Poems strongly surrealistic and mystical. He uses a great variety of forms and techniques. His structuring of thought and emotion is considered exceptional. Distinguished as a translator of nearly every major European poet. Some of his poems have been translated into English, French, German, and Italian. Zelk Zoltan. Born December 18, 1906 in Mihaly Falva. Poet. Son of a village cantor. Spent childhood in Miskolc and early youth in Satmarnimity. Self-educated. Worked as apprentice and physical laborer. Participated in Young Workers' Movement in Transylvania in 1921. Moved to Budapest when 19, where he worked at odd jobs and later became a journalist and publisher's reader. His poems were first published in 1925 in 365, later in Documentum and Munca. Joined Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party in 1925. Was arrested in 1926, exiled permanently, and transported to Romania. Returned to Hungary secretly in 1928 and lived for years under assumed name. After 1928 his poems were published regularly in Nyugat, Magyarország, Zepso, and various kinds of dailies. Arrested again in 1935 but was released at insistence of Literary World. Served in forced labor camp 1942 to 1944. Escaped and lived underground until end of World War II. Joined Communist Party in 1945. Began to edit cultural section of Szabadság in 1945, contributed to Népszava, and became reader for Athenaeum publisher. Awarded Baumgarten Prize for Kajalobin Tenur, 1947, Kossuth Prize for New Poems, 1949, Attila György Prize for New Poems, 1951, and Kossuth Prize for Mint Ego Lelkismeret, 1954. Became member of Secretariat of Hungarian Writers' Federation in early 1950s. Founded Kisdobos in 1952 and edited it until 1956. Sentenced to 3-year prison term for his activities during the 1956 revolution, released on October 15, 1958. Again became a member of Writers' Federation in 1962. His early poems show influence of Expressionism and of Nyugat school. His later works reflect his concern with the problems of workers and peasants. Tales and poems for children important part of life work. Some of his poems have been translated into Bulgarian, Czech, French, Italian, Polish, Romanian, and Russian. Zilahi Lehos. Born March 27, 1891 in Nagasalantak. Novelist, dramatist, short story writer. Father notary public. Attended schools in Nagasalantak, Erzsébetváros, and Maramarosaget. Obtained doctorate in jurisprudence from University of Budapest and worked in a law office in Nagasalantak. Wounded in action in World War I. His poems published during World War I brought first fame. Joined staff of Magyarország in early 1920s, became its editor 1934 to 1936. Awarded Bojanec Prize by Hungarian Academy of Sciences for SUT and NAP, 1924, a Tabornok, 1928, and a Suzyes Agodoli, 1937. Became member of Kisfaluti Tarsasig in 1925, later of Patofi Tarsasig. Worked as journalist in Paris and London. Elected president of Pen Club in 1926. Staff member of Budapesti Hírlap in 1927 and AZS Publications in 1930s. Edited Magyarország 1934 to 1936, meanwhile founded short-lived UJ Zalemi Front, an organization of populist writers. Edited Hit 1940 to 1944. Opposed both fascism and communism. Founded Pegasus for production of motion pictures and directed some of them. One of them, Fatternyok, banned in 1944. Gave all assets to government treasury in early 1940s for use in educating youth in world peace, which led to the establishment of Kajtunok Iskoleja. In 1945 he became first president of Hungarian Soviet Cultural Society and editor of Irodalom Es Tudomeni. emigrated to United States in 1947, where he continues to write. Some of his plays have been produced on Broadway and filmed in Hollywood. A Suzi Godoli was revived by Jókai Hez in Budapest in 1957. His plays and novels are the most important part of his writings. Blends romanticism and realism. Delineates the disintegration of Hungarian middle class. Strongly humanistic in outlook. Attacks ruling class for offenses against Hungarian people. Widely read at home and abroad. Several of his novels have been translated into Bulgarian, Croatian, Czech, Danish, Dutch, English, Estonian, Finnish, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Polish, Romanian, Serbian, Slovakian, Spanish, mainly, Swedish, and Turkish, and some of his plays into German, Italian, and Spanish. An edition of his short stories is available in Spanish, and some of his short stories have been translated into Bulgarian, Croatian, English, Estonian, French, German, Italian, Polish, Portuguese, Slovakian, Spanish, and Swedish, and some of his poems into German. Zrinyi Miklos. Born May 1, 1620 in Ozali or Ksokternya, died November 18, 1664 in Ksokternya. Poet, writer on military science, statesman, general. Descendant of an aristocratic family with large estates. Spent early years in Ksokternya with his brother, was orphaned at 6. His education was entrusted to Peter Pasmany, QV, by Ferdinand II. Received excellent education in Graz 1630, Vienna 1634, and Nagasombat 1635. Went to Italy in 1636 and visited Rome, Naples, Florence, and Venice. Returned to Hungary in February 1637, withdrew to estate in Ksokternya and devoted most of his energy to political questions and military activity because his family estates were always subject to devastation by the Turks. Named general in 1646 and viceroy of Croatia in 1647 by Ferdinand III. These positions gave him continual interest in military science and resulted in works on that subject, Taborikis Tracta, after 1646, and Vitez Hadnaji, 1650 to 1653, the first evaluating problems of military organization and the second developing his concept of the ideal general. Both were first published in 1852 edition by Gabor Kazincha. Married Eusebia Draskoviches in 1646, and after her death in 1651 married Zsofia Lablu in 1652. Became chief of Hungarian military forces for a time but was removed by the Austrians despite his victories against the Turks. Died from injuries suffered during a boar hunt in Ksokternya, Kakovec. Towering figure in Baroque literature and a major contributor to development of Hungarian literature. Italian Baroque style and poetic traditions of the Hungarian Renaissance influenced his writings but did not arrest individual development of style. His many-sided literary efforts were unified by the desire to advance the state of Hungarian culture. His works often express opposition to the Turks and the Habsburgs as threats to Hungarian independence. Pressing Turkish question resulted in Turakafum, 1660 to 1661, a polemic treatise. Szegedi Vezedelem, 1651, written 1645 to 1646, celebrating his great-grandfather at Szegedvar, is considered to be the greatest epic in Hungarian literature. He also wrote love poetry. Szegedi Vezedelem is available in Croatian, German, and Italian, and some of its parts as well as some of his poems have been translated into Bulgarian, English, French, German, Italian, and Russian.